Hello everyone. So anime and manga is a pretty big deal in most of the world. In the English-speaking world, they've carved out a significant place for themselves in our pop culture lexicon. Gone are the days where it's weird to like anime and where anime is seen as a particularly foreign piece of entertainment. However, the growth of the anime and manga industry in the English-speaking world is already pretty well known to us. After all, we've experienced it. I've always been curious as to what anime and manga culture is like within Japan's closest geographical and cultural neighbors. This video will focus on the growth of anime and manga in mainland China. Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau have their own political and social contexts different from the mainland ran directly by the communist government, so any discussion on the growth of the industry in those polities would need their own videos. So if you decided to ignore history class, or you've decided to disregard any world news in the last 50 years, you'll know that Japan and China haven't been on the friendliest terms recently. While both nations historically share so many cultural elements, there's also a fair share of conflict throughout history. The Yuan-Mongol dynasty used China as a springboard for an invasion of Japan in the 1200s. Japan and China found themselves in conflict in Korea in the late 1500s as Oda Nobunaga tried to acquire land for his now unoccupied soldiers after the brief unification of Japan. And modern Japan fought China twice in 1895 and 1931 respectively. With this history of violence between the two nations, you would think Japanese entertainment industries would have trouble breaking into the Chinese market. Well, yes, but also no. See, Japanese manga and anime have been under consistent scrutiny by the Chinese state, as they're wary of the cultural influence such manga will have. Plus, certain manga may express ideas against state values, but at the same time, it's such a cash cow for China that they can't help but allow elements of it in, because of how much it has taken off. An article by Crunchyroll's Daryl Harding stated that in 2018, Chinese anime inspired by Japanese styles have become a $26 billion industry. A 2019 article by Anthony Fung, Boris Pun, and Yoshitaka Mori all concluded via survey in 3 of China's largest cities, Beijing, Guangzhou, and Shanghai, that China is the world's largest market for comics. What this all means is that anime and manga have cemented themselves into China, regardless of the state's reservations. If we want to track the start of this phenomenon, we need to go back to 1978. China and Japan signed a peace treaty which enabled them to do business on a large scale. One particular cash crop was anime, which was ready to take China by storm. See, an interesting 2005 paper by Lund University's Wang claims that the state of Chinese media industries were pretty poor in 1978. I can understand that. After a civil war, a failed industrialist initiative that killed millions, and decades of confusion and repression under Mao, China didn't spare much time or money for its media industries. Mao died in 1976, and China, under successor Deng Xiaoping, decided to go a different direction, and began opening up trade relations in the late 70s and 1980s. The flood of anime arrived in China at an ideal time. It was significantly cheaper to import anime to Chinese screens than it was Western shows, and anime did not have much significant local competition at the time. The uptake in anime on Chinese television around this time can also be viewed as propaganda for the peace treaty, to show off its benefits, which is another reason so much anime started coming out after 1978. Astro Boy is arguably considered the first anime hit in China, as it aired in 1978, soon after the treaty. Other anime popular in the early 80s, according to Yang Wang's paper, were Volleyball Girls, a girls' sports anime, of course, and The Wonderful Adventure of Nils, a Japanese anime adaptation of a Swedish book by Selma Lagerlöf. Notably, this series was Studio Pierrot's first ever production. Long story short, that anime is about a shitty kid who likes to abuse animals on his farm, but then he befriends them over time. I never even heard of this series until I started researching for this video, so this is pretty cool. The late 80s apparently saw the popularity of Doraemon and the Flower Fairies manga, so the latter of which I have no information on, like zero. The early 90s saw the rise of the Doraemon anime, Saint Seiya, Dragon Ball, Ranma 1/2, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and City Hunter. Now that last one is interesting because some people know about City Hunter in the West, but I don't think it ever really took off here. I might be wrong, but I've barely even heard about it in my time watching anime and reading manga. The late 90s was apparently the era of Slam Dunk. In the 2000s, at the time of this paper's creation roughly, Detective Conan and Evangelion ruled the screens. Another one that Yang Wang claims is popular in China was Daughter of the Nile, otherwise known as Crest of the Royal Family, a story about an American girl sent back in time to ancient Egypt. So that's really interesting because I've heard very little of that series, but it was apparently a hit in China. A few more interesting tidbits before we move on. I checked out top 10 lists by China Daily and China.org for the most popular manga in China. They seem to agree on Doraemon, Sailor Moon, One Piece, Dragon Ball, and Slam Dunk. A few differences arose though. China Daily claims Digimon is one of the most influential anime in China, as well as Gintama. It also mentions Crayon Shin-chan, a comedic series which ran in manga form for 20 years and apparently is still going on TV. China.org had a few different entries. They mentioned Gundam, Saint Seiya, Fist in the North Star, and Smart EQ-san, a series based on the life of an actual Buddhist monk called EQ. Moving on. So the rise of manga in China apparently took place a little later. According to Asako P.Saito at the Asia Institute of the University of Melbourne, the rate of piracy increased from the 90s onwards. Of course, keep in mind this is a time where more methods of sending and receiving information were becoming possible, so even banned series can now make their way across the sea. Add smartphones to the mix a decade or so later, and you have the behemoth of a presence in China that manga is today. This is also aided by loose copyright laws. Of course, like the West, a lot of manga is pirated, but China does have a few official resources for popular manga. Most notably, FanFan, based out of Guangzhou, publishes Shueisha titles in Chinese, and Tianwen Kadokawa, based out of Guangzhou, publishes Kadokawa titles in Chinese. From the 90s, manga soon became a staple alongside anime within China, although any manga with same-sex themes or content has struggled to get through to Chinese audiences, because of the state's social conservatism. So those kinds of manga are even under more scrutiny than conventional manga. But the state responded to the rise of manga with the 5155 Project, a state-sponsored comic initiative to boost the amount of locally made comics in China, hiring the best artists to combat the rise of Japanese manga. It saw initial success, but the program petered out and shut down in 2005. Many artists were paid poorly, and the program was proving far too costly. Of course, this wasn't the end of Chinese attempts to replicate and or compete with Japanese anime and manga. Today, manhwa and Chinese animation are all considerable forces in the world of entertainment. Now, what are some elements that have allowed anime to thrive in China? Well, many of them are not too unlike our own here in the English-speaking world. But it's not without its particular quirks. The first I'd like to mention is that the broad nature of anime and manga as such a diverse medium enables it to appeal to many, regardless of cultural and political differences. Manga and anime can have stories set in the West, in the Middle East, in Japan itself, or even other Asian countries like China and Korea. This can help depoliticize manga and anime to an extent that Chinese audiences can watch it largely without feeling offended. Next is that a lot of Chinese people started watching anime when they were young, apparently as early as kindergarten according to Wang. So it's a lot like how a lot of people my age when they were kids watched Dragon Ball Z, Pokemon, and Digimon, and were introduced to anime the same way. Now, China is no different in liking shonen series over the other genres. Shonen is popular for its themes of freedom and control over one's own life. Now, anyone can relate to those ideals, but you can imagine the feeling as 5 or 10-fold in a place like mainland China, with heavy censorship, state interference in career paths and economic opportunities, and its social conservatism. Keep in mind also that China is one of the most urbanized nations in the whole world. For people used to the bland, repetitive, and lifeless urban sprawl that can be city life at times, popular shonen manga and anime can convey a sense of uniqueness and adventure that you can imagine a lot of Chinese urban youth would love to have. Of course, this is an unrealistic standard for anyone, anywhere in the world, considering that shonen tends to be fantastical fiction most of the time with a lot of unrealistic elements. But that doesn't stop people from being inspired. Quoting Fung, Pun, and Mori's article, Ho Lok, an interviewee from Beijing, exclaimed that the most famous Japanese manga, One Piece, was his only love, because it gave him the hope to dream as well as companionship. He imagined himself as the main character in the manga Luffy, and he wished he could one day escape from the hardship of work and reality and pursue his own dream. Full Metal Alchemist also inspires interviewee Ri Hong to think about the world in more complex terms. They said, Full Metal Alchemist influences me mostly as the meaning of quid pro quo inspires me to think that everything has its price. And we cannot ask for more, or we'll suffer and lose something important because of the surplus we want to make. I learned to care more about humanity and the damage accompanied by technological advancement. On the flip side, readers and viewers, just like an English-speaking fandom, can be prone to having misconceptions about Japan and Japanese society. One interviewee discussed what he thinks of Japanese girls as a result of watching and reading anime and manga. Furthermore, misconceptions about Japan being better than it really is, and Japanese media being superior to all others, including their own, these are ideas that anime and manga fans that are not delusional are all too tired of hearing here in the West. And in China, the same conflicts exist. It's not all sunshine and rainbows though. Most interviewees did not cut Japan any slack over international disputes or historical events, so there absolutely is a capacity to separate one's taste in entertainment from political viewpoints. Watching things from a certain place does not mean you agree with everything about that place. This is the same vein that Hollywood films are huge worldwide, but a lot of people still disagree with American foreign policy. Personally, I love a lot of Japanese entertainment, from anime to manga to video games, but that doesn't mean I think Japan's war crimes in its past are any less worthy of condemnation, nor do I agree with current Japanese nationalism and xenophobia. So a lot of Chinese consumers of Japanese products can still divide their passions from their political opinions. Now, where does this all leave us today? Well, like I mentioned at the start, China is a huge market for anime and manga. Today, anime mobile games are arguably the most popular games in China, and Chinese anime inspired by styles and forms originating in Japan are on the rise. Despite all of the popularity and the money, the state has not made it easy. If we go back to 2009, the government proposed a new internet filtering system called the Green Dam Youth Escort. This system would of course make finding and reading manga a lot harder for Chinese youth, so it spawned the meme of the Green Dam Girl. A conventional anime-looking girl who was supposed to be an airhead, apparently representing the stupidity of the proposed filtering system. In 2014, the government blacklisted 38 anime series for content supposedly against its values. This list included popular anime like Psycho Pass, Afro Samurai, Terror and Resonance, Attack on Titan, and Tokyo Ghoul. Despite this, the industry still chugs along today. Anime and manga continues to impact China, and their own animated productions are becoming all the more frequent. And finally, just last year, most Chinese seem to have thought that Demon Slayer was the best of 2019, so they're not thinking too differently from the rest of us here in English-speaking fandom. Anyway, thank you for watching everyone. I hope you enjoyed this brief look at anime and manga culture in China. Please feel free to point out any mistakes I made. The more I know, the better. If people like this video enough, I would love to do a video on anime and manga in South Korea, or maybe Southeast Asia, or maybe even India. Anyway, I hope you all have a great day, and take care.